against, right? And there's the other case. This is a very local story that's getting national attention. It's the story of Stephon Alonzo Clark, 22-year-old black male who was shot down by Sac PD. And this week, 20 rounds, correct? He was shot. He was unarmed. And so at first report, it was, well, they shot him because he was in the backyard of a house. There were reports that someone had been breaking into homes, so they get in on this guy. And it was his grandmother's backyard, from my understanding, and he was holding just a cell phone. But at first report, they thought it was some sort of tool, some sort of toolbar, like a crowbar, that he had in his hand. Then they thought it was a gun, so that was their reason to shoot him. But the question is, 20 rounds, was that necessary, unarmed at the end of it? If you didn't know it was a gun in his hand, why did you shoot 20 rounds and kill this guy? And so the community is reacting this morning, and of course there are two sides of the story, and Walt Gray had reported, and I'm trying to get the information now as to his background, not that it has necessarily anything to do with the fact that an unarmed man was shot down, but he did have a criminal history.
He did, and Walt did mention that this morning in our Morning Blend newscast, but a lot of people chimed back in on that conversation and said, you know what, his past or not, what they knew about him or not, it was a man unarmed, holding a cell phone in a family member's backyard.
What they know so far,
who did
hasn't been fully investigated.
Who had not shot one single round. And so
and
it doesn't
be able
matter
to because there was no firearm on
there
him.
wasn't. And so to think that a man who hadn't been actually convicted of that crime that they were searching for a suspect on was shot that many times, that's the thing that people have a lot of problems with right now.
Yeah, I mean, these situations are always, you come into these situations somewhat with the bias of what you've witnessed before, and okay, is this going to be like all the other ones? Or when we see the video, is there that moment where, you know what, this obviously is tragic, and as the officer spoke out in front of the city council yesterday, regardless of what happens, we know that this is a tragedy, and you start from there. But the one thing I'm happy about is that there's video of this.
There's body cam footage that is out there. It has not been released yet, but it is supposed to be released later this week. So we will bring you that footage as we sort through
and that's crucial. I mean, one of the things that's happened that's positive and over what communities all across the United States have been going through is that we know that video is going to help figure out what happened. And then in the future, and this is just my belief, I think that these incidents happen all over the country because as they're going through training, officers, there's a moment they have to defend themselves, and they're trained that in a moment, if you're uncertain, it could definitely become fatal for the officer instantly. So they have to make these split-second decisions, and very often it's the moment where you decide is met with instantaneous lethal force. Essentially, you keep firing until that suspect is completely down, and that there's no opportunity for anything bad to happen after that for the officer. But you keep seeing in these, as they release these videos, is that it really goes down in a matter of seconds. So we're going to find out a lot more from that video because that's really going to tell the story. But it is a tragedy no matter what we learn. It is a tragedy that another young, unarmed black man in his grandmother's backyard is now dead, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
But you have his name added to a list of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, the 20-some-odd people who fit the same description. And you say, there have been cameras in those situations before. It's not like this is new. How have we not learned from the information that we already have? And what are people doing to discuss the problem of inherent bias that exists in the police system? And so I know that there are companies, my cousin works for one, that goes to different police academies throughout the country and addresses this idea of inherent bias and how to get that out so that when it comes to policing, you see a person, you assess exactly what you know in that moment.
You don't make assumptions
and
based
then
on the
you
color
approach.
of the skin.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't want to have that conversation about how the police officers can actually change what they do on a day-to-day basis. But I'm glad that there are companies, and I'm trying to reach out to my cousin now who lives in New York to see if he can come in or come on to the conversation and talk to us about this. But I would like to know what our viewers feel has changed in the, 3 years or so that we've really been talking about Black Lives Matter and what that means to you guys. I want to know that.
Again, the body cam footage will come out later this week when we learn some more information. And I'm seeing here people are confused because we're saying 20 shots were fired. How many actually hit him? We don't know yet. And a lot of you are saying, well, I thought it was only 4. 20 shots were fired. We don't know if they intentionally didn't shoot him. It could have been 1 shot that killed him. It could have been 4. It could have been 20. Not sure yet, and the investigation is, of course, ongoing. We'll keep you posted.
And again, you try not to make too much of the shots fired. Just from my understanding of how officers are trained is that you keep firing your weapon until the threat is over 100%. So they may not have been convinced after 7 or 8 shots that the suspect was indeed down and there was no threat to them, because that's how they perceive how things go down in the moment. So we imagine that there is excessive bullets were fired and there's something else going on there, but for the going back to the training, you fire the weapon until the threat is over, because in that moment the officer is fearing for their life, so they're trying to end the threat right there. So again, some of this goes back to training.
It does, and you can only hope that at the end of the day, so we have Daniel Hahn. He's our police commissioner. Is that what his official title is? He spoke this morning about how, regardless of what we know about the suspect, about the victim in this case, it's still a sad story. And another sad story on top of a list of ones that we've mentioned time and time again. But it doesn't make it any easier to talk about.
Right.
I'm seeing a lot of you chime in with the comments here. Joshua Willison, thank you. Put yourself in their shoes in a very unknown situation, talking about the officers. What would you do when your adrenaline is going? It's instant fight or flight. People react differently no matter the training. And then Kimberly Morgan said, I'll agree with that, Joshua. We can say this is bad, but what's going on in the moment? But 20 rounds fired, ? Unnecessary. We weren't there. Don't know the exact situation. We will feel like we were there once we get that body cam footage and we're able to see it.
Right. And here's the other thing too. Sometimes the video is not conclusive.
Right. Then there's that.
Sometimes even after
he didn't
you
have
the
a
video,
body cam on.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Even after you see the video, some of these things are still hard to determine. But I would say one thing that again is positive is that this police department in particular, Sacramento, is very transparent about these. We have body cams in Sacramento. Some communities do not, or there's a history of not turning them on, or they're not charged, or what have you. So at least in Sacramento, with this police department, they are adamant about having the cameras and using them, and then releasing the video to the public.
So we've talked about Blackish on the show and how many different TV shows and people just have to have the conversation with little black boys, mostly, about what they do when they're approached by a law officer, a police officer, and how to handle that situation. I even remember there was a country music star who put a video together of what he would do if he were approached by a cop coming to his car window. And I remember him distinctly putting his hands on the steering wheel and just saying, guys, at the end of the day, it's not about your pride. Like, if you are in a position where you want to make this police officer feel comfortable, do exactly what I'm saying in this video. So keep your hands out. Make sure that you've already gone for your paperwork before they come to the car. It's just having to have that conversation with little black boys in this country who don't know that sometimes people see them differently. They might not have had to deal with that before. And then to have a conversation with them about how to address police officers, it makes me sad. Number one, I understand that we need to protect them, but it just makes me sad.
What were you going to say about Blackish, which is a show on ABC?
That's what I'm saying. They have these conversations and they find ways to talk about them. And you remember Michael Brown. Everyone after Michael Brown was keep your hands up. If a policeman says something to you, just put your hands up or get down on the ground. And you wonder why Stephon didn't do that in the moment. And if that was a conversation that was missed.
Well, we don't know. Right?
No, but you still have to talk about it. And it's not that we're speculating. People say don't speculate. I don't think that it is speculation. I think that we have to address the overwhelming concern that people have for people in this country that are marginalized and who do feel like they're being attacked. It's a conversation we have to have.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been going on now, and when I said on the show this morning that it's getting national attention, because I'm just seeing it all over social media, and it's deja vu, because we've had this conversation before. But yes, to the point of speculation, absolutely, waiting for that camera footage to come through, waiting for more to come in, because as we know, as you mentioned, Han, which is our Sacramento police chief, the first black Sacramento police chief, so it's hard to, look, go, okay, well, you have a black man who's in charge. You have someone who identifies with these people. So how different of a case will this be? It's an interesting thing to sit back and watch and see what happens. Because I would imagine if you're talking about that and you're talking about the racial issues in our country and the racial issues within the person, the citizen, and the police force, then you have someone at the head of the police force who is a man of color. Then does this conversation look different?
A lot of this is centered around race, which I totally understand because this is some of the known things that we know about this. But I want to go back to something I just saw in the news just yesterday. There's an officer who will be going on trial for murder in Minneapolis. A lady, Australian lady, married an American, called 911 because she heard some strange sounds. It sounded like someone was being assaulted in the alley behind her house. She called 911 to bring out an officer to say, can you check on this? Next thing you know, she's outside in the alley. She gets shot and killed. The person who called 911, okay, she happens to be a white woman. She happens to be from Australia originally, but then in a relationship, and that's why she was in Minnesota. So these situations, I think that the concerning thing overall is, yes, and race is part of all of this as well. It has to be, because these are the things that we know. But also, there's just what troubles me, what concerns me the most is that routine things are turning deadly so quickly, and that is a concern, because even if you're the person calling 911 because you're a concerned citizen, you could now be dead in an alleyway. Now, we don't know what happened between then and there. That's actually going to be a trial that we will all be able to watch closely, and it's ongoing in Minnesota. But the reality of the situation is that these interactions with citizens and police officers very quickly. There you go. That's the woman. You can see right there, that's the woman who was killed by the officer. Again, that officer is going on trial for murder in this case. But it just highlights that interactions with the public and police officers, regardless of race, regardless of if you're a suspect or the person calling 911, they are turning deadly very quickly. These are things that are happening very, very fast. Mistaken identity. I don't really know what happened, but the reality is that that's what concerns me overall, because as this keeps happening, Minnesota, Sacramento, Florida, you name it, the trust and the interactions between a citizen and the police officer is frayed. There's a concern from you're supposed to trust the police officers.
Protecting and serving
their
job.
And the vast majority of police officers will jump in front of a bullet to save your life.
Yes.
They do this all the time.
I have family members who are in the police force. They're also going home to families or not coming home to families in a lot of cases.
Exactly, but it's the relationship from these bad situations that unfold that concerns me, because in order to make this all work, you need to trust the police officer coming to your house, and if a police officer approaches you, there needs to be a relationship that establishes immediately that we are here to help and we are here to make this situation go away peacefully and resolve it. And very often, because of these high-profile cases, we have this sense lurking in the background that there's a sense of distrust there. When in fact, many police officers, they're just there to help.
And we've seen those
it's not fair
viral
to
videos.
them. However, from the citizen's point of view, these things do happen. So that's something that, regardless of race, is sort of trickling along in the background.
Yeah, and I mean, personally, I've seen a lot of the videos of the good cops out there, right? Do they get as much attention as the ones when you have a high-profile case? And, of course, at the center of it, it's race. And, of course, it's high-profile because it's happening too often. You saw the head of the Sacramento chapter of BLM, Black Lives Matter, talk on the show yesterday. And she said, at the end of the day, cops need to stop killing us, meaning the black people in Sacramento. So clearly it's an issue. They're trying to address the issue. There's another case, a man who was unarmed, who happened to be black, killed by officers. And we don't know, was the officer who shot him black? Does that change the conversation?
I don't know.
Again, these are all speculation. So it could go a lot of different ways, and I know this conversation is ongoing.
Can I bring in one other story?
Yeah.
I used to live in New Zealand, so I'm approaching this from a different point of view. Is that I spent a year out of the country, and you witness law enforcement how they interact in different ways. So I was out with my friends, and people were getting rowdy, and the officers approached this guy who was clearly intoxicated. Time for him to go home. I said, "Oh no, this guy's going to get arrested." And they said, "What do you mean arrested? They'll probably just drive him home." I said, "No."
Really?
Yeah, and it's a different interaction. They don't even have weapons on them as they're policing. You know, college town, a lot of intoxicated people, could get rowdy, could get dangerous quickly. But the relationship there was just different. It was just different. It was they might come up to you and give you a hard time and take you home rather than taking you to jail. So it's just a different interaction. And to see that, you realize in other parts of the world, that interaction, that relationship is just different than it can be here in the United States.
So then for people in the comments right now that are saying all lives matter, it shouldn't be a race issue, this isn't a race issue. Isn't it though? Because when you think about how people grow up, and I guess this is a counterpoint to what I was saying earlier, but if people grow up in a non-minority family, understanding that interaction with the police can be a positive thing, and then you have a little kid who doesn't grow up with that same understanding, their reaction to the exact same command, put your hands up or get on the ground, and we don't know that either of those commands were given to Stephon Clark, but just given those two situations, I think that the reactions inherently would be different, because one, you're reacting out of fear, and the other one, you're reacting out of deference to authority. And it's like, how do you speak to all lives matter on an equal playing field when things aren't equal to begin with? I think that's a valid point.
What are the comments? I'm curious.
People going in, so now it's a race thing, says Tom Handline, little black boys, so little white girls can't be criminals. It's one question.
Of course, but are little white girls, again, growing up the same way? Are they being approached by cops in the same way? Are they committing the same crimes? Who knows? There are so many factors.
Matt Menning, Mike Brown, that hands up thing is a lie. For the record, didn't happen. It's sad that the urban culture won't fix itself.
I don't know what that means.
Then Joshua Willison, please stop pinning this situation back on the black community. It's everyone now. I had a gun drawn on me after asking to pull my wallet out in a speeding incident last year. So as a white man, it's not just the black community.
Right, but I'd be interested to hear exactly how he responded to that and how he felt in that moment, because that's what really determines the outcome of the situation. It's the way that you react to what the police says. That's all I'm saying.